welcome back to Chapter 4 in our World Regional Geography course. And there's a saying that I'm sure you've heard it said, and perhaps have used it, used it yourself. I cannot do justice to it. You've heard that before, and meaning one cannot bring out the best effect in what in something, and it's usually in many cases relates to telling a story. Um, can you relate to that? I'm sure some of you, if not most or all of you, can. We're coming to a section now. We're coming to a section now where I've always felt that way in trying to explain a bulk of what I'm going to explain, the magnitude of it to your generation. Primarily, I set myself up for this because I choose to highlight the Cold War years related to this studying this region, Russia and its neighboring countries, right, which is formerly the Soviet Union. So once the Soviet Union collapsed, the subsequent changes geographically that occurred, the magnitude of the Cold War, well, it can't be overstated. I think that's part of the problem I have in trying to bring that out. It included, and so I've kind of given up on that, realizing I probably can't. But it included some high stakes drama. For example, the Cuban Missile Crisis, which I'm sure they're still teaching that in high school, and a constant chess match between the two superpowers that constantly left well, I'm trying to think of a good way to say it, distant anxiety, right, lurking in the backs of the minds of those here in the West. And then to add to that anxiety, when the 1980s emerged, the United States was, in my opinion, and this is highly debatable, arguably losing the Cold War. Yeah, we're coming out of Vietnam and what that helped do to the economy, uh, and Watergate, right? So, and the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan. We had, the Iranian hostage crisis. By the time the 1980 election season was ongoing, we had 53 hostages that were in Iran, right? And our president at the time really didn't seem to have any answers for that. So, at that time, if you were to tell the average American that the Soviet Union would someday exist, that would be difficult to fathom. That would be difficult to fathom, I can assure you. Therefore, a good chunk of the scene I want to set up will be related to how the unthinkable actually happened rather quickly, but not without the effects of the existence of Soviet communism, overspilling onto the rest of the region after it ceased to exist. Let's take a look at where we're going and some of the heads up terms. We'll start there, I suppose. Russia and the neighboring countries. The CIS is the Commonwealth of Independent States. What it was, the whole region was dubbed once the Soviet Union dissolved. Rus, basically ancient people who gave their name to the lands of Russia and Belarus. And I would say this too. I would qualify that by saying that there is no small amount of disagreement on their origin and identity. Muscovy becomes like a provincial area around what we know as Moscow. The Bolsheviks, a radical far left and revolutionary Marxist faction founded by Vladimir Lenin and Alexander Bogdanov in 19 first decade of the 20th century. Can't remember the exact date right now. Of course, Vladimir Lenin spearheads that. Mention, uh, got to put his name on there, but Vladimir Lenin. Annexation. Annexation is the idea of taking territory neighboring your nation's borders. The Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, that is the USSR. 5 year plans. Early on, after Lenin dies, Joseph Stalin takes over command of the Soviet Union, and he looks to industrialize the country, and he does this through. He wants to do it in 5 years, right? The 5 year plans. The Iron Curtain, the Iron Curtain, term dubbed by Winston Churchill uh, at the political division that comes down across Europe, the Iron Curtain. The gulags, I will be spending some time on that. It'll be part of your reading, an interesting reading, if I do say so myself. And we'll be on your, going to be on your quiz, and going to be looking forward to that, some mention of that in your discussion posts. Gulags were concentration camps um, by uh, by the Soviet Union, constructed to put so-called dissidents. And in the paper, you'll find out what the range of what constituted a dissident, right? Perestroika. Perestroika. Once the Soviet Union began to um, unfold, um, then Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev tried to save the system by giving some capitalist reforms to get the economy going, called perestroika, and to allow people to have some voice, some kind of, if they wanted to criticize the government, so to speak, called glasnost. Mikhail Gorbachev, of course, was, comes into power in 1985, I believe. More on him a little later. Joseph Stalin, of course, the second, um, the second leader of the Soviet Union. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. We'll talk about him. He was a Russian novelist and philosopher and historian, and an outspoken critic of communism, and he helped raise global awareness of political repression in the Soviet Union, um, pointing out the gulags, which the Soviets tried to hide from the rest of the globe. The Virgin Lands Campaign, farmland that was never used, farmland that was mismanaged, and one of the problems with having top-down run bureaucracy making decisions for an entire country that was 13 time zones wide, 12 or 13 time zones wide. So a lot of mismanagement there. The secret cities, these were cities um, underground camps where the Soviets would do nuclear research. And then the Southern Caucasus, probably the one area here outside of where Russia is today in the CIS that I'll be dwelling on because of its strategic location, made up of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. So what we want to do here is we want to understand the primary resources or reasons behind the collapse of the Soviet Union. We want to understand the population patterns that play into the region and the region's role in today's globalized world. And we want to recognize the effects of the Soviet era on the CIS and the neighboring states at the present time. So the New World, 1991, right? CIS emerges, Soviet Union collapses, countries basically that emerged from the Soviet collapse. That is makes up your um, countries of independent states. Crossroads, imperialism and cultural diversity, cultural homogeneity, um, the difference between the European empires. Um, the Russians conquered lands. The Russians conquered lands and peoples adjacent to it, as opposed to land overseas. In other words, i.e., they extended their borders from annexation. And this is plays no small part during Cold War. You have your what we call, I mean, the world was pretty bipolar. Soviet Union, U.S., two superpowers, and each would look to garner client states around the globe to keep them from falling into the other, superpowers' orbit. And besides that, they all had natural resources that both superpowers could glean. The problem was the United States and the West, they colonized, right? So they were in various areas already. And that was not good public relations in trying to keep, some of these potential client states in your orbit. And where the Soviets, they were hated nearby. They annexed territory nearby, brutally bringing tanks or whatnot. And but out in the middle of the Pacific, or down in South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, the Soviets were not there. They were not colonizing. They didn't have as bad as a name, right, as the U.S. and a lot of certainly European powers. On this point here, page 149, um, page 149, figure 411 would be a good visual for you to go to here. And that basically, um, talk shows you the old, early on, the old principalities of Rus and some of the neighboring territories there, and nice color key there, taking you back to the early days. Let's break down Rus, right? Let's break down Rus as a result. Uh, 800s, right? 800s, Varangians, in, if I say in Russian, basically Vikings, right? Vikings moved into North European plain via the Volga River, and Novgorod and Kiev, two of the most important principalities between 900 and 1000 A.D. And they adopt Eastern Orthodox Christianity. So, and then from the east, you have the Mongols, and they established the Shaynate of the Golden Horde. This is basically steppe land of Central Asia and Siberia, roughly that area around 12 to 1200s. And on figure 410, you could see kind of some inset geography there of that particular region. Muscovy, Moscow, right? Moscow emerged as an important principality in Muscovy, and as a result of this, it becomes important because of its forested locale on a trade route between the Baltic and the Black Seas. On page 150, figure 412, you can see an inset of that as well. Kind of moving along here in a timeline of the kind of the big towers of Russian history and transformation. We move to the Russian Empire. Muscovy was expanded under Peter the Great. He founded St. Petersburg while attempting to westernize the country. And then we move to the 20th century. The Soviet Union emerges, the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks, under the authority of Vladimir Lenin, established the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics in 1922. The actual revolution started taking place in 1917 to oust Nicholas and his regime, and the czarist, the end of the czarist regime, the Romanov regime. Lenin dies in the 1920s. Joseph Stalin and the 5 year plans would be the first blank there. The 5 year plans. 5 year plans are developed. This was Joseph Stalin's attempt to help commercial farmers learn communism. Based on industrialization, your small farmers were merged to create the large farms. So therefore, the government becomes the employers while the commercial farmers become the factory workers. You're kind of a side note there, since this isn't history class, but your commercial farmers were what they were called kulaks, and the kulaks were commercial farmers, right? Capitalists, evil thing in communist Soviet Union, certainly in the eyes of Joseph Stalin. So you took those kulaks who were dangerous, put them in the factories. You wanted to industrialize the country. You needed to do that. Soviet Union, formerly Russia, that particular area was a backwater, right? And so you put them into the factories, but you need to eat, right? You need the bread, so you take those small farmers and you put them on government co-ops, right? During World War II, the Soviets and the West teamed up with, kind of backing up a little bit here now, during the Soviet Union. Uh, Actually, I guess I'm moving ahead here. The 5 year plans started a little bit before our involvement. I misspoke there, our involvement in World War II. But anyway, at any rate, the Soviets and the West, right, teamed up, right, to defeat Hitler and the Nazis. And when the bombing stopped, though, when the bombing stopped and the shooting stopped, the Soviet Red Army was right in the middle of Europe. The Soviets demanded that those countries become satellites of their empire to buffer it from Western aggression. And this became known as the Iron Curtain. A lot of people ask about that. Well, were they being paranoid? I don't think so. Napoleon had invaded Russia, and then now Hitler. So you know, I could see the concerns about having buffer states. The Soviet Red Army was certainly in a rush to get as far west as they could for once the bombing stopped. Right, they could negotiate from that position from where they were at. Just going to take briefly here a look at the physical geography. Pages 138 to 143 deals with this. The Russian and neighboring countries region is the world's largest in terms of land area. Like I said, Russia itself is you know over 10 time zones going left to right. But the vast size and northerly location result in large expanses of mid-latitude continental interior climates here, looking at the map, with particularly harsh winters. The plains interrupted by the Ural Mountains and the low hills dominate the western half of the region. Your low plateaus and mountains dominate in the east. There are several very long rivers in the region, but many of these rivers flow northward and remain frozen during much of the year. Vegetation and soil regions follow the patterns of climates with tundra and coniferous forests, otherwise known as taiga. kind of a biome of needle leaf trees, right, in the north. And then you have what we have here, and certainly in Pennsylvania, right, your deciferous forests. And then you have steppe and desert in the south. The best agricultural conditions are the steppe grasslands where the black earth, Chernozem, otherwise known as soils, are found. Pollution is a problem in many parts of the region, particularly in areas when experiencing rapid industrialization during the Soviet era. Contraction of the Aral Sea, the result of water diversion for agriculture in Central Asia, that continues to be one of the world's greatest environmental disasters. And if you take a look at Figure 4.3, page 140, Figure 4.8, and page 146, and Figure 4.9, and page 148, you can get at least in one of these, a capsule view of the devastation of that mismanagement around. Now that the Soviet Union is dissolved, that has become, some of the neighboring countries' problems now. Again, just mismanagement from having things top down run from Moscow, right? Instead of not having things more localized at least. Global changes. Global changes and local responses, right? Kind of swerving into that theme. And we're getting into the Cold War here, Cold War history. The Soviets closed off their society from the rest of the capitalist world. As a result of being closed, the world really did not see the inherent weaknesses within. Inefficiencies, as I kind of alluded to, with some of the environmental management inefficiencies, struggles to keep up with an arms race, right? I'll get into that here in a minute, with the U.S., and just basic inequalities. In March of 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev comes to power. He sees the empire crumbling and introduces Western reforms. We're going to get to that in a minute. How was the empire crumbling? Perestroika, economic restructuring. Glasnost, informational openness. And basically, what Gorbachev begins to do is to separate the economy from politics and introduce some free market reforms. Well, what's the U.S. role in all of this? The U.S. role in the collapse of the Soviet Union, Reagan and his top aides. I'll talk through this and then you can copy it down. Reagan and his top aides saw inherent weaknesses in the Soviet system. They knew the Soviets were spending almost their entire GDP on the military. So the Reagan administration kind of upped the ante on the Soviets, forcing Gorbachev to make democratic and free market reforms. The Reagan administration broadcasted Western propaganda into Russia and East Europe via Radio Free Europe, which also hastened unrest among the people. And in Poland, I should get this rolling here. And in Poland, you had the Solidarity Union. It was a union, and there was contention there toward against the communist Polish government. Of course, that was all initially run and overseen by Moscow, right, of the Soviet Union, the capital of the Soviet Union. And the Reagan administration was looking to foment discontent to keep that going too, that discontent. The Reagan administration felt that Poland fell, the rest of the Soviet Empire would fall. Soviet Union dissolved in December 31st, 1991. None of us here really ever thought that we would see that happen, right? And on page 159, the statue of Lenin came down that day. Very emotional event for so many of us. The other thing the Reagan administration did, and you'll see this with the videos I have lined up for you, we had, well, he wanted to have a missile defense system called the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI. And we had the economy to do it. When Reagan came into office, he wanted to get the economy going. He cut taxes, and it led to a big economic boom, which was able to pay for SDI and build the military up again because he just didn't feel that, just didn't like the state of the Cold War, the way it was going. So to build the economy up again, and it would pay for things like the Strategic Defense Initiative. The Soviet communist economy, it just couldn't, it didn't have the economy to do it. It was already crumbling. So the Reagan administration said, ha ha, we see a cancer there. Let's look to cripple it. So they kind of jacked the arms race up in order to build down what they said. And this is really the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union. And in your videos, I got some short video clips, you will see how Gorbachev and Reagan meet one another. They have two meetings, and Gorbachev tries to talk Reagan out of building SDI in return for taking all the nukes out of Europe. So there's a big carrot he was offering Reagan, which Reagan never really accepts. He never really trusted the Soviets. Now, the Soviet Union, it's debatable whether Russia, well, the Soviet Union collapsed. So the political nerve center was Russia, right? And it's debatable whether Russia is still a world power. There's an interesting reading in your textbook about that, if you're so inclined, pages 156 and 157. It's a point and counterpoint to that. They are on the UN Security Council. They are a member of the G8, the group of the world's wealthiest countries. Still a strong nuclear power. 14% of the country still lives in poverty. Therefore, a lot of this is due to the transformation to democracy and capitalism after after that collapse. It hasn't been easy. Figure 414 on page 155 relates to this. Now, human rights. Human rights, under Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union set up labor camps called the gulags. Called the gulags, again, you're reading. We'll dig into what these gulags were like. The gulags were formed for economic development. A large percentage of your uh, production for goods in the throughout the Soviet Union was accomplished through the work in these concentration camps. Farmers who did not abide the kulaks, the former kulaks, who did not abide by these collectivist practices. I guess it was probably the small farmers too, not abiding by the collectivist practices. They were, put in the gulags. They were forced to work in coal, copper, and gold mines. 3 million died there. Uh, Clergymen, your universal religious thinkers, who were not looking to the Soviet Union. They were to the government for answers. They were put there. Intellectuals were put there. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote two books. He was in prison for criticizing Stalin. Alexander Solzhenitsyn won the Gold Prize, or the Nobel Prize, for a book called Gulag Archipelago, and he also wrote another one called One Day in the Life of Ivan Desinovich. And in your paper, uh, it is quoted. Some of Desinovich's, experiences there are brought out in the four-page reading I have for you to take a look at. A little longer reading this time than normal. I think you'll find it very interesting and beneficial when you get to some of the graded assignments that you need to take from me, right? Women had more career choices than other women in the world. However, medicine and engineering were not as regarded as important in the Soviet Union. Figure 415, page 158, um, bears some bears some of this out as well. Some folks argue, and I wouldn't argue against this. Women were given a few more chances and choices in the Soviet Union as a means to busting up the family, taking the women out of the home. And if there were two things the Soviets were concerned about were, well, three things: intellectuals, spreading information, religious, especially Christianity. Yeah, they had major concerns with that, and um, and the family structure, getting people's eyes off of, the god of government. Population distribution patterns. Greatest area of population concentration was in the Russian Federation, and that's in Western Russia. And on page 170, you can see that subregion. Most productive farming area was found in the Ukraine. A lot of wheat there. Moldova, a lot of fruit production, uh, vegetable and fruit, vegetable, wine, tobacco there along the sea. Concern of the people in the Slavic country is that the population decline. There's some concern there. Women dominate over 60% of the population bracket due to a lot of the World War II deaths. Death rates are once again rising after they were declining. Land use, I've been talking about this from the Soviet era. In the 1960s, in the Soviet era, Nikita Khrushchev, the premier from, it was after Stalin died in 53, I think it's 53 to mid 60s. He looked to increase agricultural production through the Virgin Lands campaign, which was farmland not used in the past. So, in the long run, the plan failed. There was much bad soil. The Caspian and Aral Seas had much water diverted from it in order to irrigate. And then Gorbachev comes into power in 1985, and he allowed for private land leasing in 1988 as a way to encourage production. Now, some of you have heard of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1988 or 1986, and there's a book called The Awakening of the Soviet Union. And there was an interview after the Soviet Union collapsed, and some of the guys who worked on that nuclear reactor, and they said, "Well, what happened?" And their answer was, "Well, what happened was the system." And what they meant by that was, under communism, you just had quotas. Like if I produced one row of bricks and you produced three a row of bricks in 1 hour, we both got paid the same, right? And after a while, it would register to you that, we're both getting paid the same. I'm not going to kill myself. So the system, again, top down run system, making sure everything, was the same, everyone had the same incomes. They basically made a really lousy product. And that is what happened at Chernobyl. Mikhail Gorbachev, after Reagan is forcing him into trying to save the system, he's enacting perestroika, right? I mentioned that earlier, free market reforms, and you could see it here, right? He's opening up private land leasing, right, to encourage production, some kind of private incentive. The secret cities. The secret cities, these were linked to the nuclear industry. A lot of bio warfare research, scientific research institutes, labor camps again, and missile weapons designs. These were underground. And this was not revealed. No one knew this until after the 1991 breakup. And lastly, Russia and its regional dominance. Again, the political nerve center of the Soviet Union was Russia, right? Were the Russians. So, otherwise known as the Russian Federation, the modern political state of Russia consists of 89 political units, and for control, the Soviets drew up boundaries that deliberately left many minorities during the Soviet era outside of their territories. They would move them, they would displace them while transplanting Russians into those areas. So during the Soviet era, Russians would pour into the area to exploit the natural resources. The greatest number of Russians are west of the Ural Mountains. You can see that on page 170, figure 425, and that's called the Heartland. It's called the Heartland. It's the greatest area of political and economic activity in the Russian Federation. And lastly, page 179, the Southern Caucasus, strategic area there. Um, Azerbaijan could become the world's leading oil producers. The question is if they can exploit the fields. You can turn to page 184 too to see a little inset of this particular area I'm talking about, the former Soviet Union. This region was limited by the Soviets to develop industry and therefore keep them dependent upon the other republics. But the Southern Caucasus has a complex ethnic and cultural geography, and again, since the and you don't have to write this down here. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there have been conflicts over secession and borders that result in armed clashes in Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. So there you have it. For the sake of time, you guys can look at the graphic organizer that's been supplied, giving you just a wrap up of the major points that I just discussed. If you need me to read the for your auditory learners, if you need me to go over that graphic organizer here on camera, let me know. I'll be glad to do it. So there you have that. Let's look at what's up ahead. And I'm not thinking there's too much out of the ordinary here. Yes, your reading. Your reading is 4 pages about the gulags, uh, found in the, you're going to find it in the chapter 4. Let's get this spelled right here, right? Your chapter 4 module. You have your graphic organizer, hopefully, right? You have your graphic organizer. Videos. The videos are going to be in 3 parts, about 10 minutes each. But they're very important because you're going to be quizzed on some of those things. And I'm going to need you to discuss it in discussion questions. And but it's probably the most important summits that ever took place because the world changed after these summits. So there's the beginning and the end of these 2 summits of the Soviet Union. Again, as I said, that Ronald Reagan refused to meet with the Soviets. He said, "Look, they lie, they cheat. Once he comes into office in '81, our economy wasn't doing good because we're not going to talk to them until we can do it from a position of strength." And that was cutting taxes, building the military up, luring the Soviets into an arms race to eliminate them. By late '85, he meets with Mikhail Gorbachev, right? And the first meeting is very dramatic. Some funny human interest stories in there as well. Just tremendously done by the American Experience, by PBS. So I want you to see that. And you can argue too that somewhat emotional too. Certainly for those who grew up in the Cold War. Thursday, feedback. Let me know if you want to Zoom and talk in person about things. Feedback night, I call it. And then you have in the news, right? Of course, that is due. at midnight. Friday, your initial posts, response posts on Sunday, quiz on Monday, and then we began chapter 5, East Asia, with the lecture. And right there, we're looking at our friends in China. So there you have it. Again, you have questions, comments, and if you do need me uh, look at anything and answer any questions, right, you can get a hold of me via email. You don't have to wait till Thursday night. So you guys have a great week, and you know, do well, and we'll talk to you again next time. Bye bye.